Welcome to the Kitsap Literary Artists and Writers of Washington and its monthly artist showcase. I am your host, Mark Miller. Today I have the pleasure of interviewing a commensurate historical fiction author, Denise Frisino. I have known Denise for several years, and especially this time of this pain in the butt virus, I have been bugging her about a special project that we're going to also be discussing today. So Denise, thank you very much for being here today. And I'm very, very, very glad that you made it.
Thank you for having me.
And you have two different subjects for your historical novels. How did you happen to come up with the first one? And then, and then we'll morph into the second one.
The first one is about Prohibition through the San Juan Islands. And what happened was I was a cocktail waitress up at Roach Harbor.
Ah.
I know, those were the days, my friend. in the early 70s.
I'm not even going to ask.
Yeah, you don't want to know, right? And a friend of mine told me that his grandmother had been a rum runner during Prohibition. I said, "Oh, Nikki, honey, you are drunk. Sit down. I'm not going to serve you any more drinks." So he said, "No, really, my grandmother helped my grandfather as a rum runner." Well, I came home. My father was a writer for the Seattle Post-Intelligencer. Remember that grand old paper in its day? And I said, "Dad, what do you think about this? Nick is saying this." And he goes, "Write it, Deese." So I started researching. And during my researching on Prohibition, so then I came out with the book. And what happened was I wrote it, and it sat on a shelf, the proverbial shelf that holds everyone's books.
Right.
And I got this call from Paul Dorpat, and Paul says, "Denise, where's that book of yours, the one on rum runners, Prohibition?" And I said, "I don't know, it's around here somewhere, Paul." He said, "Well, get it out. Ken Burns is doing a show on rum running," and I told the channel that you were PBS, that you were our expert in the area. It's like, thanks, Paul. Love it that you told them that. So I got it out, and I actually got it published and in print 3 days before Ken Burns' show aired, because I didn't want everyone saying, "Oh, you're just copying Ken."
Right.
No. I had already done all the research and written it. Well, and it's done very well, by the way, and it's a really fun story. It's an older woman telling a younger woman how she was the rum runner, but there was a murder that was never solved back then. So the two of them get together and solve the murder and figure out who the murderer was at the end. When I was researching that book, I happened on a gentleman up in the San Juans who was taking me around to show me where the FBI was hiding and things of that sort. And he told me, "Oh, honey, Prohibition is nothing." It really popped my balloon, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, let me tell you a story. There was a young woman at UW, and she was, before the war broke out, and she was fluent in Japanese, but she was Caucasian.
Right.
So when the FBI found out about her, they took her, dressed her like a hooker, put her in the bars of San Francisco, and had her listen to the conversations to figure out where the Japanese spies were located, from Alaska to Mexico."
Right.
And I said, "Thank you for the storyline." And so that sat and percolated for quite some time. And then the story just fell, literally, Mark, as you know, you've heard some of the miracles that happened along the way, fell into my lap. And the first book, which is Orchids of War, came out a few years ago, and it's done well. It's been a finalist in a couple of national competitions, which is always fun to have. And I wrote that one, then I got to December 7th of 1941, and I was at page about 450, and I thought, well, the Bible's heavy enough to pick up, and nobody will be able to pick this book up if I have to get through the entire war. So then I started into the second book, my most recent one, Storms from a Clear Sky. And again, I got to 1943, and I was at about page 450, and I thought, nope, it's a trilogy. So I am currently working on the third book.
Well, I can tell you what a publisher told me once.
Yes.
Because I wrote this War and Peace of alien squid invasion novels, and it was over 540,000 words. And when I told this one publisher, she says, "Who the hell do you think you are, George R.R. Martin?" And I says, "Why not?" So
There you have it.
Yeah. Why do you, the length of your book, it is what it is.
Right. Yeah. So that's how I happened into this. I had no idea. I was not a history major at all. I did theater and drama all of my life, but and I did not think I was a writer because that was my father's cap, right? And here I am.
Well, then how did you wind up finding all these veterans for the interviews? And then how did you proceed, with speaking for them, with them?
So what happened was, thanks for asking that, Mark, because yes, I've spent over 9 years interviewing men and women from World War II, and I have collected over 50 interviews. And
these are taped interviews.
Taped. Most of them are taped. Some of them didn't want to be on camera, which I understood, so I just have the voice, just the vocal tapes. Yeah. Yes, and I would chase him in the ferry line, in Fred Meyer, in Costco. The last one I found was in Costco, and I literally...
And you never got arrested for chasing
I never got arrested for chasing elderly men and women down the road, literally.
Exactly.
And so, that's how, and Post 227, which is in Seattle, North Seattle, I spent a lot of time there, and they helped hook me up, and then from there. But once it was out that this is what I was doing, a lot of the people found me. I mean, it was just absolutely, I told one person, and they led me to another, to another, to another. And that's when you know you're doing the right thing in writing, is when the storm walls just open and you're off and running.
And for the audience here, what they don't understand, and because I'm not exactly young, and my father was a World War II vet. Mm-hmm. We have fewer and fewer World War II vets that are still alive. And so this is why I keep bugging you about the project, because I don't want all that great work to disappear.
Well, thank you. I know it's very sad that it was a honor to sit with them for the 3 hours that it generally took to interview them, and then again and again, some of them repeatedly, but most of them. Well, since you've asked,
yes,
I have this board that is representative of some of the men and women that I've interviewed. And unfortunately, most of these have passed. And it breaks my heart. There's very few. Now you asked, this is my dad right here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And he was?
Second Lieutenant, Signal Corps.
Oh, Signal Corps, okay.
Yeah. And he said that one of the most interesting things that I found out about, I'll put this down for now so we can talk. I'll bring it back up when we talk specifically about people. But one of the most interesting things that he had to say was that no one knew where Pearl Harbor was at the time of the attack. And of all those men and women, I would always ask that question. I think I know specifically one woman did, but that was because her church was sending food and cookies for Thanksgiving over to Pearl Harbor. But in the instance of my father, he said he walked in to the, I don't know if it was the mess or where he was, but everybody's ear was around the radio. And he said, oh, this can't be good. Right. What's going on? And somebody said they just attacked Pearl Harbor. They actually went to the shelf and got off an encyclopedia and looked it up to find out where it was.
Yeah, if you weren't Navy, most people, like you said, nobody thought of the Hawaiian Islands. Oh, there's a big naval base out there. Well, most people didn't even realize that.
No, because it was fairly new naval base. Very provocative to have done that, but thank heavens that the decision was made to put the base there at that point in time. Yeah. So, and the other interesting thing was the reason that my father went in early was because he was working for a newspaper as a youngster.
Oh,
back east in Maryland.
Oh, okay.
And they put him in the library, so he was with the librarian helping choose the pictures that were going to go. Right. That's why when Dad was at the PI, one of his jobs was art editor, but choosing which pictures. And he said he was looking at all of these war pictures from all over the world. And he said, So he went in early, and he was just about to get out. He'd done his year when the war broke out, and he said he did 4 years of overtime.
Here we go.
Yeah. So.
Well, and that's what people don't understand or realize, back in 41, they went and they barely passed the draft law again, extension, by one vote. So everybody was brought in for 1 year of training and sent home. But they were talking about doing away with that in I think it was the end of 40, beginning of 41. And by one vote, they kept it going. And then, of course, Pearl Harbor happened.
Right, the anticipation of the war coming out, yes. Yeah, so it has been a journey. But I tell you, the other thing to think about too is these men and women who served and they were some of the stories I can't even begin to tell you. This particular person right here, Joe, I don't know if you can see Joe very well, but when they put this up, this one right here is Joe. First wave, D-Day. He was considered an old man at the time because he'd already been in Africa.
Oh, okay.
He was in it, I think, 17 or 18. Remember, a lot of them lied to get in.
Oh, yeah.
Once Pearl Harbor happened, all they wanted to do was
Right.
serve their country. So he'd already served in Africa, and he was considered an old man. And so I have on my blogs, I have some of what he said happened on D-Day.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. This man right here, he was out of London, and pilot. And boy, he talks about flying home. Dwight Stevens, he talks about flying home with his wings so shot up that he can't hear his co-pilot next to him talking.
So he was flying
the wind,
bombers, yeah.
And the wind through their shot up wings was so intense. And he also talks about it was so cold. They had 2 sets of gloves, and I said, was the interior silk? And he looked at me, and I said, well, I was a skier. And the interior was silk, but they would take off their exterior gloves, and they would take turns batting the ice off of the radio to keep it working. I know, it goes on and on and on. Battle of the Bulge, Battle of the Bulge, Battle of the Bulge. So when you have time, now here's a pilot. He was he was in the Philippines. Oh. So I asked, what did you wear? What kind of clothes did you wear? Well, Dwight, electric suits.
Right.
Heat.
Yeah.
Anything that they could get to stay warm. This gentleman said as little as possible, honey, because he was in the Philippines and they were tin cans. They were so hot. It was just sweltering. So just a lot of research here. Oh.
I got
go ahead.
I got one picture here.
Who?
The young lady here. What's that
This
picture?
is very fascinating. This is her inside the relocation camp, and this is her wedding picture. But I said to her, look at your flowers.
Yeah.
And she said, oh yeah, we had a florist in our, she taught piano and was paid by the government to teach piano. She had 2 pianos inside the camps. And she was paid, I think it was $18 a month, which was a lot of money back then. On top of the stipends and everything else that they acquired, that they were given inside the camps. Now I have one other pilot. I have a couple more pilots. First man shot at Kaneohe, Captain Dick McNeese. Now he was one of my first interviewees, and he was fantastic. Both he and his brothers were the first men in. His brother coming up as what would eventually become the SEALs, and he was
UDT underwater
right
demolition teams.
And he was the one who and so what I do with these, why all of these, for example, he told me what happened to him the night before Pearl at a football game, a famous football game in Oahu, and what happened to him, and so why he didn't go out partying that night with everyone, and he was sitting at the table.
Yeah.
Now, what they were told was, because they were seeing subs, they were seeing subs everywhere in Hawaii. And so they were confused. And he was a PBY pilot.
Oh, okay.
Out of Kaneohe.
Right.
PBY was Patrol Boat Catalina. He was Catalina. So they were told to keep all of our submarines in a specific area. Okay, now, this is us. Anything outside of this radius, this happened about, I can't remember if it was a week or just days before Pearl happened. Anything outside of that radius, you drop on. So Dick is at the mess hall, and they're exchanging pilots.
Mm-hmm.
And the one pilot comes in and he says, "Are we at war? I just dropped on someone. I just dropped a bomb." And just then, the Japanese planes came flying through, and Dick ran out, and he was the first one outside to be shot at. So what I do is I take what happens to these men and women, and I put them in my historical fiction books to make sure that they're extremely accurate, and that they are involve some of these stories.
Of course, now we talk a lot about it, PTSD and everything now. PTSD and World War II veterans, because I've got some stories from my father with some of his neighborhood, boys, men that he grew up with, and when they came back, the effect it had on them. When you talk to these veterans, how did they talk about how they handled what they saw and the additional stress once they came back to civilian life?
Well, that's an excellent question, because there was no real outlet for them except each other. And this is another picture that will show up later, and this is Ray Swally, and this fits perfectly with what you're talking about right now. He was a pilot in the Pacific, and Ray's wife said to me after the interview, I never let the family around because they wouldn't talk about it.
Right.
They didn't want their children and family members to know really all that they had been through, their first kill, their injuries, what really happened over there. And his wife looked at me and said, "Now he's going to have nightmares all night long tonight." And I had to apologize to her and thank him, because I knew it was going to be another struggle. I recently had one of the gentlemen I chased down in Costco.
And didn't get arrested.
And didn't get arrested for. I got to the door. His daughter texted me and she goes, "I don't know." I said, "I'm going." I got to the door and he opened the door and he says, "I don't think I can do this." I said, "Well, that's okay.
Yeah.
That's all right. Let's just sit down." So I sat down and I put my little camera up, and I just was talking to him as I was assembling. And he says, I can't talk about it. There was this storm. And I said, "Oh." And luckily, I had interviewed 3 other men who had been in or around that specific storm off of Japan right before the end of the war.
The hurricane.
That horrible hurricane. And unfortunately, he had a horrific time and lost a lot of people on his boat. And one of his jobs was then to walk the shore afterwards with flags to mark where they were finding
the bodies,
parts of bodies, what have you. And so he obviously didn't want to talk about that. But having the knowledge of this typhoon, and I started talking about other people, and I said, "Well, this happened to him." And one of the men that I interviewed, who was a neighbor of mine, Al Beers, he wrote it out in a landing craft. They went out to sea, and he wrote it out, and he was like, "Really?" So then, 3 hours later, and he brought out all of his books and all of his pictures to share with me, and I called him the next day, and I said, "How are you doing?" He said, "I'm okay." I said, "Did you have any nightmares?" And he goes, "No, surprisingly, I didn't." But see, he'd had his nightmares building up to it, having to talk about it.
Yeah.
And I said, "Do you think you feel a little bit better having talked about it?" And he said, "I really think I do. I do feel a little bit better." So, in some ways, this is very cathartic for them as well.
You were talking about the effect that war has on the families. Okay, quick story. My father grew up with this one gentleman who wound up in the Marines in Guadalcanal.
Oof.
Yeah. So he comes back to civilian life, and his wife had to wake him up with a broom handle because they had Japanese infiltrators in Guadalcanal would come in and try to slit their throats.
In the middle of the night.
Middle of the night. So any little disturbance would immediately combat fight or flight. And so before she learned this trick, okay, and then like you said, this is before all this treatment that we have, or treatment we try to have today.
Correct.
she was literally picked up one. He was asleep on the sofa. She walked up to shake him. He grabbed her and threw the front window.
Oh.
Yeah. And so, of course, then they realized what this was all about. This was all, he had those hidden demons of having to survive at Guadalcanal, and it never left him. So you had to adapt.
Everyone I interviewed, especially those in the European theater.
Right.
Oh, especially those towards the end of the war.
Right.
They did not want to go to Japan. And in fact, one of them, a professor at Seattle University, Bob Harmon, he called it the glorious bomb.
Right.
He says, and I'll tell you why. I didn't have all my points in. I had just been landed right after D-Day, excuse me, fought across Europe, the Battle of the Bulge, froze in the winter, and ended up actually in the salt mines, kind of protecting the artwork.
Oh,
he wasn't one of those men, but he says he was in the caves.
Right.
And he said, and I was about to be deployed to the Pacific. And he was like, no, I can't do this. I can't go on any longer. So he was. Besides that, we were killing more of the Japanese with our firebombing every night anyway than we were at those two, Nagasaki and Hiroshima, than those two. But to his point about the Japanese at night in the Pacific, those in the European theater didn't want to go there for a second reason. At least in Europe, they had old stone walls or something.
Right.
To have over their heads for the most part. In the Pacific, you were digging out. You were mosquitoes. You had alligators. My dad was in, and you had Japanese who were trained to come in at night. They were trained to fight at night, which is like so un-American. What do you mean you're going to fight at night?
Right.
It was absolutely phenomenal to them. They couldn't understand why. They were constant. The Charlies coming in to the airplanes coming in to bomb and keep them awake all night long, and
it was washing machine Charlie.
Yeah, anything to keep our men off balance, and then them crawling through to come in and kill you at night. And my father was first on the Alcan, and then he was on the Burma Road. And when he first arrived in Burma, now he's Signal Corps, so that means, somebody's protecting him.
Right.
But he had pythons.
Yep.
The most famous letter we have to Mom is, "Just a minute, Harriet, gotta go." And he comes back and says, I just had to kill a 15-foot python. I hope you don't mind. I had to changing my sentence structure here. But it was coming up. At first, they were on the ground.
Right.
And he woke up and he said there was 25 different colors of frogs. That would be my father to count them. But the man who was the sniper who kept my father alive,
right,
who was over him while he was working, sending messages to Vinegar Joe and all those things. Right before they deployed back, they heard a pop. And they couldn't figure out what it was. And he looked around and he couldn't find Fred. And they found him in the woods.
Yeah.
He'd killed himself.
Oh, Jesus.
He couldn't stand coming home to knowing all of the people he had killed.
Right.
And he took his own life over there.
Yeah.
And that upset my father, I think, more than anything.
My father wound up in the Merchant Marine because he was working in the shipyards when World War II started. They froze everybody in the shipyards. This is one of these stories nobody ever talks about. War material production was so important that if you had one of those specific jobs, you were frozen in the job.
That's right.
Initially, they wouldn't let you sign up. Okay.
You were needed.
Exactly. So he wound up getting his back broken because a guy fell off. They were making a Liberty ship, and a guy fell off above him, and he tried to catch him, broke his back. Well, of course, forget ever going in the military. So he wound up going in the Merchant Marine in the end of 1944, and then he wound up going in the Pacific. So he told me the story of they were hauling bombs and troops to Iwo Jima. and he walked on the beach and put his hand in the sand, and when he got his hand out of the sand, it was just completely full of spent shell casings and everything. And people don't realize what went on in some of the very last battles, because unfortunately the Japanese had that mentality of dying for the emperor, and
Yes.
they would literally die to the last person. And that was so, like you said, so alien to us that we never went into it.
And all of the women who grabbed their children and jumped on
Oh, yeah.
Okinawa. I mean, it really was.
Saipan also,
Yeah, it really was embedded in them. Now we have to remember that we're talking about something that happened,
Exactly.
This is not the Japanese of today.
Yeah.
This is the Japanese from Japan who were under a dictator, 2 or 3 of them actually, and manipulated, who believed you died for your emperor no matter what.
Right.
The Americans were actually, we were called dogs, which was one of the words, one of the
Nicer
euphemisms,
words, yeah.
that they, and that we were very subhuman, and to surrender was considered unacceptable even for us. So if we were captured, one of the pilots, the one who flew in the Philippines, said that another thing that happened a lot of is your crew would be traded out if something was wrong.
Right.
So his radio man, I can't remember the other radio man, and I can't remember, maybe an engineer or
a flight engineer
or
possibly.
navigator,
Yeah.
I don't know what, went on another. He said they were very nice, 2 young Jewish boys from New York, and that plane was shot down, and unfortunately they couldn't get to him in time, and the Japanese got a hold of them, and they just stripped him right there and beheaded him right there on the beach as the Americans were trying to get to him. So people in the Pacific never, ever, ever wanted to be captured.
Right.
Because, I mean, it was horrific. One of the women on this poster and the picture that will come up spent, I believe she went in at 9. She was captured at 9. She was over.
Where at?
She was in the Philippines visiting her aunt, who was in the Navy, a nurse in the Navy with her mother. And she developed a polio. And back then they didn't know what it was, so they wouldn't let her on the airplane to get her out.
Right.
And she spent 4 years in a Japanese prison camp, she and her mother.
It's a 9-year-old.
Mm-hmm. And what was interesting with her interview is she told me some, and then the minute she was one who did not want to be filmed, and the minute I clicked it off, she started telling me the real stories. And I feel like I have PTSD sometimes just thinking about them. This was not fun.
Well,
war is ugly, and that's one thing that people have to remember. We can't get involved again the way we were involved back then.
and that's one reason also why, because of, like you said, the stories and histories, I definitely keep bugging you about
I know.
it.
Gotta get those done.
Gotta get that done. Don't let it disappear.
Because this type of history is educational as well as entertaining. I try to have both of those aspects in there. In fact, Storms from a Clear Sky, my last one, was also a recipient, finalist in 2, national competitions, including the Nancy Pearl. I was one of 3 in the Nancy Pearl Award, which is exciting and fun. So, but one of the reasons for writing books like this, why would I pick a subject matter that is so controversial, is to try and show the balance. There were spies in America. I mean, everybody had spies. Gordon Prang, who wrote At Dawn We Slept, said that there was the 2 oldest occupations are hookers and spies. They go as far back as the Bible.
True.
So those are the 2. I think it's chapter 7. And so that's what he relates. So thinking that there were not Japanese spies on American soil is just not a good train of thought, because it's not realistic. They were extremely well organized, and they were.
There were Nazi spies.
Oh,
and
sure.
The other thing I didn't understand is Stalin had spies, even though we were supposedly allies. He had spies in the U.S.
We had spies everywhere too.
Yeah, that's, I guess, is it's true. One of the stories nobody ever thinks about is that Allies were even spying on each other.
Oh, they had to, you know. What is that saying? Trust no one,
Yeah.
you know? Trust no one.
Trust but verify.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. So it is and it was fascinating to uncover how organized they were and how well established. When I actually give talks on this, I have a lecture that I give on the spies that were up and down the West Coast, and I always start with a map of 1934 that shows the Japanese intent to come.
Right.
And there's little red dotted lines: Alaska,
Yeah.
Seattle, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and the canal.
Right.
Or, Panama.
Yeah.
Panama. So from 1934 on, those were their intents. And then I showed this other one that it was a letter from the Japanese consulate I think it's Los Angeles, asking for a map of the waterworks.
Oh yeah.
It's like, and they politely said, no, we're not going to give you that.
Yeah.
And so then what the Japanese did was they inserted some of their Japanese to work their way up so that they were able to get the maps anyway of the waterways and where the things were. In fact, there's a story of one man in Seattle, Washington, Kenikichi Yamamoto. Now, he came to America in 1919. And by 1939, he was escorted off McNeil Island by OSI. Everybody,
Yeah.
Feds, they were following that boat out to make sure he was long gone.
Right.
He worked his way up in the mafia, in the Japanese mafia, to become
the Yakuza.
the
Yakuza.
Yakuza.
Well,
Yakuza. Yes. He was. What he was doing was he was running the drugs. He was called the Yellow Al Capone. He actually went to Chiang Kai-shek and set it up for Al Capone, and he was running the drugs. Now he didn't want to move too far east. He ran along the coast, and there was another leader down in Los Angeles, and the two of them, they were very territorial, you know. No,
oh, of course.
He ended up Kenikichi ended up at a party at Hearst.
Yeah.
And actually asked him, do you mind if I use your docks? Because he had a fleet of boats. Right. He was embedded in the Alaska fishing. So that's where the spies were coming in a lot of the time, was through through fishing in Alaska and working their way down.
Well, let me ask you a question, because you did the Whiskey Cove about Prohibition.
Right.
They were, of course, involved in the drug trade. Did any of the Asians also get involved with, that you know of, with the Prohibition?
They, in a sense, yes, because he had in Seattle, which was the old Busch Gardens, was his headquarters.
Right.
Kenikichi Yamamoto's, it was Busch Gardens, and he was running girls, drugs, booze, and he was training his girls how to elicit information,
right.
At the last moment, basically, is the way that the history book says on him. And they couldn't catch him for all the murders. They couldn't catch him for anything. They got him on tax evasion. Of course, the old standby. Let's go for the taxes. Yeah. So, and then that particular group was taken over by a Filipino, which
that's unique.
Yeah, it is A, unique, and B, I think a lifesaver, if you think about it, because. Yeah. There wasn't as much trust there with what was going on, and it altered.
This is something I don't think people realize too, and everybody runs around and throws the word racism around. During that time frame, amongst the Asian community, they had a pecking order.
Oh, you better believe it.
And the so-called Japanese Asian co-prosperity sphere, I think was what they called it.
That's exactly what it was called, the expansion. They wanted to expand and take over all of Asia.
And what people didn't realize, though, was just like the Nazis, the Japanese would be here and everybody else was treated as a subservient human being, and sometimes not even a human being, because of your race. Even though you were all Asians, that didn't matter.
Right.
There was a pecking order.
Well, they went into China, and I tell, it's a fact, I have it in my book. There was, just as one incident, as how barbaric they were in China, there was two Japanese, I don't know what they were, lieutenants, whatever. They had a competition to see who could behead 100 people first. Yeah. I mean, that was their fun.
They took photos of practicing with their katanas,
right, exactly, their swords,
and bayonet practice on the local natives in around New Guinea and stuff.
Then of course you have what happened in the Philippines.
Oh yeah,
and how horrible
Death March and everything.
Death March, and how terrible they were to them, and when they occupied. And if you don't think that there were spies, there's several books out there. Remember, they attacked the Philippines the same day, but because of the time frame, it says the 8th, but it was actually December 7th. And then when they attacked, and all of these Japanese that were living in the Philippines unearthed their uniforms. Right? And the one that always has stood out to me was the local photographer. He was a lieutenant in the Japanese Navy. Now, there's another thing to remember. According to the emperor and the Japanese rule of law back then, once you turned 18, you were his property to serve. Yeah. So no matter where you were supposed to be defending Japan. Now, a lot of what Kenikichi Yamamoto was doing was collecting all of this money from the drugs and everything and sending it to Japan, to the main Yakuza, the godfather of the Yakuza, to help buy the materials to support us. Right. So our men were giving the money that was being sent over that was coming back to haunt us. Just like you talked about the docks. Right. In Tacoma, there was a strike because before the war broke out, because we were shipping steel to Japan. Oh, yeah. And they finally said, no, that's going to be melted into bullets. Yeah. We are no longer going to load these ships and send them over to have bullets. That was one of the biggest, became one of the big, I don't know if it was during the war, but post-war conversations was we shipped all this scrap metal to Japan. That's right. And then a lot of it was because they don't have any very few heavy metals on the islands. Right. And so we were basically shipping all the heavy metals to them. Yes. And everything. So that could be melted down and things of that sort. Yes. So what has kind of helped you in developing your specific characters that you use to tell these stories in your books? I think my strong, tooting my horn here, my strong background in theater, because I was on stage since I was 5, helped. And I always tell when I teach a writing class, I always say, take a drama class. Take a drama class. You learn characters, you learn set, you learn costuming, you learn pacing, you learn dialect, you learn what it takes to formulate a character. So my characters are extremely lively and spirited, and the women are very strong in them. And I like to stand where I write about. Right. So, for example, I was in Hawaii on December 7th, 2014, because December 7th fell on a Sunday. Mm-hmm. I wanted to stand above Kaneohe at 7:30 in the morning to see where the moon was, and it was up there above the full moon above the Paoli, just like it was that morning. Feel the wind, do all those. So I like to. The first book, Orchids of War, is basically Bremerton Dies Inlet, Seattle, San Francisco, and Hawaii. So I went down to San Francisco, and I couldn't stop the information from finding me in San Francisco. It was phenomenal. Here's how my life was down there. I go into a bar in the Sir Francis Drake, and I'm sitting there and my husband's about to leave. He had come down with me, and we're having a drink. And I said, I'm down here writing a book, researching a book about World War II, but my first book was about Prohibition. She goes, have you seen the Prohibition Room? I said, there we go. Have you seen the Prohibition Room? It took me 3 tries to come back and find the manager. Inside that hotel, you'll never find it, because it has a certain key that unlocks the door on a certain floor, that when this building was built,
Yep.
it was built right before Prohibition, so
It's speakeasy right in there.
a storage room.
Oh, storage room.
A storage room so that the bellhops could carry suitcases full, and they had doors that opened from both sides, and there was a specific knock, and you would open the door and they'd line the booze up, whatever you wanted. And so it was their storage room for the booze. So upon finding that, of course, I made that the private headquarters of the FBI agent.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So that's how I work my hours of research in.
Do you have for any potential writers out there, do you have any insight on how to keep all your notes organized? Because it's so, I mean, let's face it, you've collected a lot of information.
Glitter is everywhere. Do not get distracted. Yes, when I try to organize, I've just got one of those brains that can do it, but for the most part, is I will cut and paste where the reference, I'll make a sheet, I'll cut and paste where I found it, right? So the www.https or whatever it is, and then that's right up at the top of the sheet.
Right.
So I can always go back to it, then I'll cut and paste the notes out of it that I want, and then I'll file it away.
So you're much more organized than us pantsers who just write.
No, listen, my characters won't leave me alone when I sit down.
Oh, there you go.
They just take over. I thought I was going right. They tell me, nope, you're going left and you're going up over that hill. And I'm like, okay, here we go.
Do you write every day?
No.
Okay.
No. I mean, life happens, right?
Yeah.
I haven't written in a while just because of what's going on in my life. But also, I do the 4 hours, and I do the morning.
Okay.
I will go down and I will do the morning, and then I will break. You have to let the story. And another trick I like is I like to leave it at a place where I know what's happening next. So if I have an idea of what's going to happen next, I stop. If it's been 4 hours, because your brain gets tired.
Oh, yeah.
You just can't keep it up all the time. Yeah.
How did you originally publish, and looking back, would you do it differently now?
Oh, it's changed so much. I mean, we could walk out the door and it'd be different on how to publish today, When I first published, when Paul Dorpat called me and said, get that book out, here's my life. I had just happened to meet a woman who said, well, I'm a publisher. I help people self-publish.
Right.
And I've got a class on how to self-publish coming up. Join me.
Right.
Boom. That's how it happened. And so I self-published, through her. She's no longer in existence, unfortunately. Through her, I did my first 2 books. And then my 3rd book, I found another person who allowed me to do that. I don't know, and now as time marches on, and I've been at it, I published my first book at age 60, Never Give Up.
Right.
And I don't know if I would, it takes so long to go through the old-fashioned way, unless you have...
Unless you stumble on a publisher right off the bat.
Right off the bat. It takes years.
Yeah.
And I didn't have years. Paul had given me a very short deadline. I only had moments. So
today,
excuse me, I've got to do this. I'm hot.
We've
excuse me.
Yeah, studio lights, people. Studio lights.
Oh boy, it's hot in here. And it's not just because it's you and I.
I know, we're not. Yes. We've kind of touched on it already, but how do you promote your books? The web page, YouTube?
I do. I have a web page. I have blogs. I have a YouTube channel. And writing the book is about 1/3 of the activity that is required to be successful. And I don't know if I'm successful that much, but at least I am selling, so that's always a good thing. Moving in the right direction. Then, it's the editing, the fine-tuning, getting the book out. And then the hard work begins. Now you've got to hit the streets. Because even if you do go through a traditional publicist, you are still required to do the majority of the advertising and everything for them.
I don't think most people realize that even with the quote-unquote mainstream big publisher like Simon & Schuster, Random House, or a lot of them now they're all winding up underneath one huge megacorp. But yeah, that's just it. If you get published by a publisher, they're going to require you to do certain things to help promote your book, because they don't want to have a bunch of dead pages, literally.
No, they're selling themselves.
Exactly.
They're selling themselves. And so that's something to remember. You will have to fork out money. You will have to do advertising. You will be doing basically what you do as a self-published. And the stigma of self-published is fading. You know, there was nobody would review you, nobody wanted to talk to you, oh, you're self-published. But so many good authors have turned to self-publishing that it's acceptable now, you know.
Yeah. The only caveat to that, I would say, is for all you people out there writing, you have to realize because so many people are self-publishing, you do have a lot more competition.
Correct.
Than that you used to have 20 years ago.
Right.
30 years ago.
But finding your niche.
Yeah.
And finding, such as, I love to do the fairs,
Exactly.
the Blackberry Festival,
Right.
those types of things. I love it because, the other thing is you should never, ever, ever get discouraged.
Right.
Coming from theater and you feel the audience and they're right there with you and you know when to pause, you know when to, keep going. And then you go into your basement as a writer alone.
Right.
And you're down there clicking away, and it's just you and the characters who are talking to you in the room. So it's really important to get out and get feedback from people who have read your books or from people who are interested in your subject matter.
You've already kind of outlined your plans. You're working on your third books of the, I guess you call it your World War II series.
I call it the Orchids Trilogy.
Okay, Orchid Trilogy.
Yeah.
And I'm bugging the heck out of you for the nonfiction book. So we know kind of what your plans are. If nothing else, I'm going to keep bugging you.
Somebody better.
Yeah. Do you have any suggestions for writers out there, especially people, and also how would they wind up contacting you if they wanted to just discuss the whole writing environment?
Oh, I invite them. Please contact me through my webpage, and it's just my name, www.denisefrisino.com, that you can just get there. And my email is denisefrisino.com, Denise@denisefrisino. Anyway, and then you asked, what was the second part?
Just kind of...
listen, I'm dyslexic. I was the first one down in the spelling bee.
Oh.
That is why I did theater. I could memorize like that. So I would memorize what I needed to do to pass, and that was about it. I was not a prolific reader ever, but I was, very good on stage. And I ended up in Los Angeles working in the film industry for a while, and I was at ACT.
And that's going to be another book.
I did work with some incredible people, so that was kind of fun.
That you would literally say that acting and drama would probably have one of the major impacts on writing and how you write and what you write about.
Absolutely, because it helps with the pacing, it helps with everything. Because pacing is important, keeping that suspense level up. Yeah, I wrote plays for theater too a little bit.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So
and
you did the old script.
Shorts.
It's plays, but there's still
and I wrote
script
for
writing.
I wrote commercials and I wrote long industrials, they were called.
Okay, yeah. Yeah.
And things of that sort. So yeah, no, I had a vast history in that.
So my understanding is there is a chance that you might wind up, at least for the veterans, possibly a film.
Well, right now, Whiskey Cove is it's a wink.
Wink.
I'm doing a wink at camera here. Whiskey Cove is in discussion, but but that's only because I'm saying no. You have to buy Whiskey Cove before you do.
Oh, because the veterans. There you go.
Actually, I wrote those. If when reading them, you'll find that they would convert so easily into a miniseries, and that is the whole point. And the point of the books, if there was a theme or if there was a purpose in these books, is to show that there certainly was another side to the relocation camps, the war relocation camps. There was a reason. The people along the coast were terrified.
Yeah.
We had Japanese submarines up and down shelling. 5 men died between December 7th, 1941 and the end of the year, the 31st, off our shores.
Right.
Their boats were sunk. These were lumber, oil, all these things. They drowned or they were shot by the Japanese off of our shores. We don't talk about that. That's the truth, so.
Well, I will say one thing, that when I'm at one of the places that we both, shall we say, show our literary works is Barbecue to You up in Gig Harbor.
Love Barbecue to You.
And whenever I start talking about Whiskey Cove and saying, oh, this is about Prohibition, in the Northwest, people go, what?
Yes, yeah.
And so invariably they'll pick the book up, and quite often they'll buy it because they didn't even realize there was a bunch of rum running. Everybody thinks of Chicago, everybody thinks of New York, everybody thinks of all the other places, failing to realize that we have this huge Puget Sound region that was very conducive to smuggling.
Well, especially the San Juan Islands,
Yeah,
because they
exactly.
were already set up to bring everything by boat. That was their commerce. That's how they did everything to begin with. So they were established, and luckily Canada helped us out there and built long docks just to satisfy quench our thirst.
Of course. Well, thanks again, Denise, for coming to the BCAT studios. It's been a long time to be able to get you back here, thanks to a certain nasty virus that came along and kind of screwed the heck out of everything.
Stay healthy, everyone.
Exactly. KLAW, Kitsap Literary Artists and Writers, has been interviewing and filming various creatives in conjunction with Bremerton Kitsap Access Television for several years. I want to thank all of our viewers who are tuning into Bremerton Kitsap Access Television and viewing this Kitsap Literary Artists and Writers production. I also wish, once again, to thank the BCAT staff. They not only put up with me, they worked tirelessly to make this broadcast a success. This broadcast interview is scheduled for later in July and August at 6 p.m. every Saturday. Channel 3 on Astound Cable and Channel 12 on Comcast. Keep in touch with our Facebook pages for KLAW, Kitsap Literary Artists and Writers, for updates on what creative we will be interviewing in the future and events the authors and artisans will attend in the community. Look for KLAW authors at the yearly Blackberry Festival and the Kitsap County Fair and Stampede, end of August and the beginning of September. We at KLAW have a mission statement to help authors and artists become known to the public and expose their artistic endeavors to the residents of Kitsap County and the world. Thus, we plan to continue this endeavor as long as the BCAT staff and the viewing public support us. KLAW exists for the artists and authors to help with marketing, distribution, and publicity. We meet every month on the first and third Wednesdays at Spiro's Pizza on Kitsap Way in Bremerton, Washington at 7 p.m. Also, for filmmakers and actors, we have a related group, Kitsap Peninsula Filmmakers, which meets on the second Tuesday of every month at the Family Pancake House on Wheaton Way, also at 7 p.m. Everyone is welcome. But we are not the only group out there. There are many independent writers and critique groups in Western Washington. The Blue Forge Group, a 501c3 nonprofit that encompasses films, publishing, comics, music, and artwork, strongly supports the arts in the Kitsap County area. A part of the group, Blue Forge Films, assisted in moving many of KLAW's shows to YouTube and other internet sites, and allowed us to use their studio space for some of our interviews. Blue Forge Press has been instrumental in helping me and others publish their works. I hope everyone has a pleasant day and a productive and fascinating year. So until next time, I'm Mark Miller with Kitsap Literary Artists and Writers in conjunction with Bremerton Kitsap Access Television and the Blue Forge Group. And once again, Denise, thank you very much for
Thank
coming.
you.
Good day.
Good day.